This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
After 4 hours of meeting, Project Restart is yet to launch, though the Premier League have confirmed that they have that desire to finish the 2019-2020 season once more. I'm Guy Clarke. This is the Blood Red podcast here from the Liverpool Echo as we get set to delve into when, where and how the Reds could get their hands on that much elusive Premier League title. We're going to talk about Project Restart, of course. We'll also get into a growing number of players expressing their concerns over the season being finished, even if it is behind closed doors, as well as talking about differing approaches taking place across the continent. Joining me to do exactly that are my colleagues Matt Addison and Dan Kay. Gentlemen, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Guy. It's been a long day, as you say. Expecting a bit more news from the Premier League, but I think there's enough for us to delve into over the next few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the problem I think we've got, as we'll get into, is that finding some kind of consensus is always going to be difficult, and that's why these meetings are dragging on as long as they are, and why things remain relatively unclear for now. But we'll try and kind of navigate our way through it as best we can.
I like the use of the word navigating there, with me starting saying Project Restart yet to launch. We're all on the same page here. And I suppose, Matt, come to you straight off. And, well, it has been a long day waiting for the Premier League statement, waiting for them to confirm exactly what the next steps are. And we're reading into the statement towards the end of it. It says no decisions were taken at today's shareholders meeting and clubs exchange views on the information provided regarding Project Restart. I suppose, therefore, the news is there's not really any news.
Yeah, that standout line, isn't it? That no decisions were taken at this meeting. It's a strange one. It's one that we've waited and we were anticipating a little bit more news. I mean, I've spoken earlier this week on our morning bulletin podcast, sort of hinting at the fact that there might be a little bit more substantial sort of things to go at today, and unfortunately that isn't the case. It looks like next week is now the sort of more likely scenario. But as you say, it's a completely unprecedented situation. It's a situation where everyone's got their own self-interest, everyone's got the sort of financial impact to think about as well. And we've said it so many times over the last few weeks and months that there's no easy solution, and I think today is just the latest reminder that as much as individual clubs or individual fans or supporters across the country might have their own ideas of what's best, and there's been a couple of new sort of possibilities of ways that we could finish the season, which I'm sure we'll come to shortly, sort of outlined this week by various different people. But to get a consensus of all 20 clubs, it's almost impossible, certainly very, very difficult. And yeah, unfortunately, we don't seem to be that much closer given what's happened today, and hopefully we'll find out a bit more next week. But just right at this moment in time, it's difficult to predict exactly when the football will be back, which unfortunately we had hoped to have a bit more of a concrete plan today.
Yeah, the third line in the statement, Dan, reads, furthermore, the Premier League's priority is the health and safety of players, coaches, managers, club staff, supporters and the wider community. But I'm going to cut to the chase and look at the final line in the statement that says the clubs reconfirm their commitment to finishing the 2019-2020 season, maintaining integrity of the competition and welcome the government's support. The issue I've got is we're saying that there's a difficulty in consensus. We've already seen someone like Karen Brady voice her opinion that the season should be null and void. When we're talking about integrity, is it integrity or is it greed from some Premier League clubs who know if this season isn't completed, realistically, there's a lot of television money that's going to have to be repaid?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that was a rhetorical question, Guy, wasn't it? Because I think we all know the answer to that. There is massive self-interest and massive greed behind some clubs' position on this. And, the use of the word integrity really is quite illuminating in that regard, because you get the impression some people wouldn't really know what integrity is if it bit them on the backside. As Matt says, finding consensus is impossible. It will be impossible. People have entrenched positions, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. The reality, as far as I'm concerned, is that until there's more clarity from the government as regards the overall health situation, I don't really see what the clubs, what the leagues, not just in this country but around Europe, can do. we have to, it's absolutely right, as you said, the first line out of the statement was regarding the health and safety of everybody involved in the game, and that must remain paramount. And, argue the most important line was then the last one, as you mentioned, the one that said the clubs are determined to finish the season. It wasn't put in brackets, but maybe it should have been, whenever that may be. When we've been waiting all day for it. The meeting started at 10:30, and then the first couple of bits started to kind of leak out shortly after 3:00, and then I think the Premier League statement dropped about 4. Now, in that period between 3 and 4, there were various lines coming out from national newspapers, and the Telegraph seemed to be ahead of the curve rather than most. And there was a line in their reporting that kind of struck out to me, and I've got it in front of me, and I'll read it out. The issue of playing the games at biosecure neutral stadia could be key, although it is understood to be opposed by several clubs who claim that it undermines the sporting integrity of the competition. And this to me ultimately is the long and short of it. I don't see how anyone can even contemplate going back to training or playing matches behind closed doors wherever they are until there is some general weight of medical opinion that it's manageable. And that might be weeks, that might be months off. And we're all, there's lots of reasons why people are keen to get football back on. There's obviously the financial element. There's the social and mental health element, because, obviously we're all cooped up. We could all do with something to occupy ourselves. But as we'll get on to, there's other people to think about in this, namely the footballers. They shouldn't be used as performing seals for the edification of the nation, just to lift everybody's spirits, while they might be putting themselves, their families, their loved ones at risk. So if we have to wait longer, we have to wait longer. That's nobody's pleased about that. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the way it has to be. It doesn't do us any help in terms of us trying to do our jobs. It doesn't do us any good in terms of us as football supporters wanting to watch our teams play and get stuck into it. But we are where we are, and I think everybody is going to have to get their heads around it that it might be some time yet.
And I suppose on that point, Matt, we've seen, I think this is probably the third or fourth meeting of this kind since the first suspension came in place. Of course, that initial deadline, I think it was the 3rd of April, wasn't it, that was given in terms of when they were going to review things. That's well long gone from now. But I suppose it's not really until the back end of this month, actually, where a concrete decision will definitely have to be made one way or another.
No, I think reading some pieces earlier today, that the deadline from UEFA is the 25th of this month for European leagues to decide one way or the other. And to be honest, that's what made it so surprising to me that France have made their big decision this week, and other leagues around Europe have made those decisions already. I think you want to give yourself as much time as possible to make the right choice and do the right thing. And you can sort of understand the Premier League waiting to a certain extent to make sure that they have as much of the facts as possible before they come to a conclusion. And we talk about there not being a consensus or anything like that. I mean, we've seen in Italy today, all 20 of the clubs in Serie A have voted to make sure that the season is concluded. The difficulty, of course, then is there's not really a consensus in how that should be done. Of course, there's a consensus that is the right thing. And, from what we believe, that is still the case in the Premier League, that all of the clubs are committed to doing that. It's just a case of where we go next and what happens next. So, look, we keep using this word difficult and unprecedented and things like that. But I think what the Premier League have done all through this process is buy themselves a little bit more time. I think what they've done with today's meeting is buy themselves another week, by which time we should have a bit more of an update from the government. As Dan says, I think it's got to come from the top. We talk about, jobs, and football is a job for these Premier League players. So until really we know a little bit more about the situation with the rest of the country and the sort of state of lockdown and the strength of that, I don't think you can really expect the Premier League to make a big decision which involves all of these players unless everyone can sort of agree that it's the right thing to do. So as much as it is frustrating, I think we will wait another week. We will see what happens. I think Thursday is the date when Boris Johnson and the government are expected to make a bit more of an announcement on what comes next in terms of the UK as a whole and the economy and that sort of thing. And maybe that then is something that Premier League clubs will be able to react to on Friday, because, as Dan said, it's not right for us to be using them as performing seals or whatever you want to sort of phrase it as. But at the same time, we do want an answer and we do want a conclusion. And I think all of the Premier League clubs and all of the Premier League players as well probably want that, because just like the rest of us, they just want to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I suppose just referring back to the statement for the last time, there's a line in here that says, the league welcomed the creation of the government medical working group for a return of elite sport, which met for the first time. Of course, they also did meet today as well. But Dan, I suppose that group, whilst being set up, as you mentioned before, there is the mental health aspect of the wider public to think of the fact that we would love to see the football return. But that government group that is meeting is going to be all about the medical opinion. You've already said on this podcast that it may be some time yet until we may well see a return of football. Do we have to therefore brace ourselves for perhaps the medics standing around and saying, as much as we want this to return, might not be plausible?
I think that's quite likely. It's perfectly possible, and this is where Britain may have a problem with this UEFA deadline. When you started asking Matt that question, I was like, well, why has this arbitrary 25th of May deadline been imposed? Now, I can understand that the governing bodies have to try and put some kind of framework into place, and as we are aware, other countries in Europe are ahead of us, not just in terms of when they first started to be hit by the virus, but also in terms of the steps that they've taken. And the figures show that Britain may well end up, the UK may well end up being one of the worst hit countries in Europe. And that situation may well reach a head when, if, for example, by the end of this month, it's the 1st of May today, it's not implausible that we could get to a situation by the end of May where around Europe, their medical people are saying, yeah, we're good to go, and our medical people are saying, hey, well, we're not. And what happens then? That could be a potentially very, very serious and significant problem for the game in this country to have to deal with. Listen, we hope it doesn't come to that. We hope that obviously they are starting to get a grip on things, but we have to be led by the medical people. Tens of thousands of people have already lost their lives to this. There is already worries about a second and potentially third wave of it. And I don't know if it's something that we're going to get into much on this. I mean, voiding is still obviously something that some people are interested in. Just chatting to a few people this week, one of the things that's got me most about that whole kind of idea is the rationale that, all right, forget this season and then we'll just start again. But what if the second or third wave is bad and you have to stop again? Do you then void the second season and start all over again? It doesn't make any sense. So as far as I'm concerned, you have to finish what you started, whether that's in early June, as we were all in a perfect world like, whether that's in October or November, or even if that's in early 2021. We have to do what's right for the health of the people of this country. And ultimately, that is going to be the decisive factor.
Yeah, you said within that, there was a phrase you used, what happens then? And this has been a question that's been playing around in my mind all week, Matt, in terms of, so in an ideal world, 18th of May rocks around and clubs can go back into training, or they all go to St. George's Park or different camps around the country to train within bigger groups. But what happens then when one player turns around and goes, I'm not comfortable with this arrangement? And Sergio Aguero, all right, yeah, he's Man City, and people listening into this will think, well, he's obviously got a bias as a Manchester City player. But he's come out and said that he's scared for his family if he were to go, and you're having social distancing measures being practiced by the general public, yet you're asking 22 players to run around on a field and at a corner all grapple and wrestle with one another.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Sergio Aguero, and certainly he will not be the only one who is thinking that. I mean, he's obviously the one who's come out and admitted it publicly, but I'm sure several others will maybe not be scared, but they'll certainly be thinking, I'm not too sure about this. I'm not quite sure, whether this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And, I mentioned Italy and Germany as well before, that, Germany, in Germany, Bayern Munich and teams like that are already back in training, and there's not really been a great deal of sort of comments coming out from players over there to say that they're uncomfortable, which I think is really, really interesting, because I think the Premier League can look at other leagues around Europe, like what they're doing in the Bundesliga. And obviously you've got the caveat of Germany have sort of had the testing for the virus and that sort of thing well before, you know, what we've had in this country. But, you know, they are back in training now. They are sort of implementing social distancing measures within training grounds and stuff like that. So, you know, I think there is a way. It's just a case of, you know, how far behind Germany are we in terms of, you know, where we're at with the virus, the readiness of you know, Premier League clubs to, you know, for example, you know, wear masks during training sessions and things like that. I mean, the logistical side of it is, you know, do we have enough masks? Can we get them to the training grounds? You know, is that realistic? I think that's the next question, and that's something that, you know, we've really got to think about, because, you know, the concerns from people like Aguero, as I say, it won't just be him, but, you know, others as well will be thinking quite rightly, health is the number one priority. And as much as football is a big part of what we do, and it's obviously their job is to do that. And, you know, you look at NHS workers and things like that who are putting themselves in danger to do their jobs. I've seen a couple of people today say, well, you know, why do footballers think they're different? You know, why shouldn't they go to work and do their thing? Well, NHS workers are in a very, very different situation, in that if they didn't work, you know, society would fall down. So you can't really compare football in the same way, and you've got to treat it as what it is, which is, you know, an entertainment sort of entity, if you like. And yeah, I'm sure the Premier League will be in discussions and the PFA will be in discussions, but we're a long, long way off that. I think, you know, this sort of June the 8th return date for Premier League matches coming back, it still seems very, very optimistic to me.
Yeah, it seems that way, and that is a phrase that's been used by a number of people in the game. Johnny Jackson, the Charlton Athletic assistant manager, I'm pretty sure, called it a pipe dream, that date that's been set out. And you've already said that obviously our jobs revolve a lot around the football, and we would love nothing more than the football to return tomorrow. But in terms of footballers, the stardom, the pedestal that they're put on, we play a big part in that in the media, in building these players up and eulogising about them. But we've got to remember, at the end of the day, these are human beings who have families. Well,
they are. And, you know, I think, you know, Matt makes a very good point about, you know, the football's position in the grander scheme of things. You know, the point he raised about, you know, they could only realistically go back to training when there's sufficient masks and, you know, PPE and everything for them. But how in all good consciousness why should that kind of equipment be getting funneled towards footballers when there's healthcare workers and frontline workers who haven't got it yet? Surely they have to be the priority. We had a story on the website yesterday morning which was essentially headlined along the lines of Premier League clubs worried about the backlash if they do come back too early, and if there was then a second outbreak of it. And I think, you know, that is something that has to be very, very carefully considered. You know, football is the national game. It consumes millions of people's working and social, and yeah, for some of us, almost every waking second. But if this is handled poorly, and, you know, also, I mean, without getting political, you know, I don't want football to be kind of hung out to dry here and almost used as a scapegoat to let the inadequacies of the government and how things have been handled, to let them get off the hook. But yeah, every footballer, whether it's someone who plays, whether it's a trainer, whether it's the kit man, whoever, they have every right to look at the bigger picture. And if they are not satisfied that the right measures for safety for them and their families, and also for the wider society that they are part of, are not in place, they have every right to say, no, I'm not taking part in this. And I certainly would back them in that. And I would expect a lot of right-minded football fans to do the same as well, even though we are all, of course, desperate to get football back, and as Liverpool supporters, desperate to get this league championship that we've worked so magnificently for 7 months of the season. It seems like about 50 years ago, doesn't it, when Liverpool last played, you know, the league match against Bournemouth and then the Atletico Madrid game. So much water has gone under the bridge since then, but the essential principles don't remain. Liverpool deserve to win this league, have won this league in to all intents and purposes, but we're living in a different kind of almost parallel universe now, and until the most important thing is sorted, and that obviously is getting a grip on this virus, then football has to take a back seat, whether people like it or not.
Yeah, it certainly does. I think Brighton Hove Albion striker Glenn Murray and Joby McAnuff, the former Reading captain, have also been two people within the game who publicly have come out and said that they wouldn't be comfortable returning at the time and the time frame that's so far been set out. But Matt, we've already spoken about the Bundesliga, but let's cast our eye across Europe. And this week there's been interesting developments with a number of leagues. We've already spoken and scratched the surface with the French league. Of course, their government announcing that no sporting events will be held. I think it was until September, they've said. And so that forced effectively Ligue 1's hand and the rest of the French football to scrap the rest of their seasons. But if that were to happen in England, they have significantly said that Paris Saint-Germain will be champions. So if that were to be happening in England, Liverpool would still get their hands on the title.
Yeah, I think everything at this moment in time does point to that being the case, whether it's a points per game sort of system that they would make up the rest of the matches or whatever it would be. I think, I don't think anybody should be too worried that the season will be null and voided and it won't count for Liverpool. I don't think that is really the issue. But, we've said all along on these podcasts that the big problem in England isn't Liverpool becoming champions. I think that's pretty obvious that they deserve that and will get that. The issue is elsewhere. The issue is relegation. It's European places and things like that. So, look, what this week has proven is in France, Lyon already have come out and mounted a legal challenge because of what's happened. I think, they were 1 point off maybe 2 points off the European places. They've missed out for effectively the first time in 25 years or so at playing European football. And quite rightly, Jean-Michel Aulas, the Lyon chief executive, has been very vocal this week of saying, that isn't right. There were, I think, a similar number of games left to play in Ligue 1 to the Premier League. I think it's sort of 10 or 11 games to play. So when you're only a point behind those European spots, it does make it difficult to argue against that. I think, we've seen it with Lyon. I think there'll be other clubs if other leagues start to do the same thing. And that people behind the scenes at the Premier League, I think, have sort of hinted at that as well, that they're very, very reticent to deny teams effectively what they would deserve. You look at Wolves, you look at Leicester, you look at Sheffield United. All of these teams quite rightly would, be very, very annoyed if this season didn't get completed and didn't get followed through, because they deserve, having played 75% of a campaign, the chance to finish off those last few games. And I know you spoke yourself to Neil Mellor about a week or so ago for a podcast, and he said exactly the same thing. All of these teams, Liverpool included, they've worked so hard to get to where they are for the first 75% of matches. Just on a moral point from that sort of point of view, it simply wouldn't be fair on those players to say, actually, none of that counts.
Yeah, Serie A have confirmed already, reconfirmed, just like the Premier League have today, that they do want, all 20 sides do want the season to be played out. We've already said that how the consensus of that comes together to seeing the season out very much does weigh club by club in terms of how they can get it done. But I suppose, Dan, just as we sort of look to that integrity word once more, no matter how this season plays out, it's not going to play out how it would have. Not only, obviously, if we had this break in play for 6 weeks, but if it's behind closed doors, if you're a side trying to stay up, if you're Aston Villa or if you're Sheffield United trying to go for Europe, those atmospheres that are created home and away in the final games of the season just aren't going to be the same.
Well, they aren't. And, there is a very strong case to say that, what happens in these last 9 games, should they be played behind closed doors, are of a different ilk to the previous 30 or 31. We've seen Liverpool supporters more than most, the impact that a crowd can have. Even the likes of Jose Mourinho and Pep Guardiola have spoken in the most glowing terms about the power of Anfield and how it can impact on events on the pitch. And I wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, all the games do end up getting played behind closed doors. Whichever teams come a cropper at the end of it, whether it's through missing out in Europe or missing out on promotion or missing out in relegation or whatever, they might have people behind the scenes. Their lawyers might be saying, well, we think we've got a case here. We think we can take this to court, and if maybe not get reinstated, then get some financial compensation for it. So it's an enormously complex, intricate, layered situation that I think is going to take a long time to play out. From my point of view, a lot of it comes down to this idea of a deadline, and I just don't feel it's right or proper for people to be putting deadlines on it, because the priority is health. You can say that until you're blue in the face, but that is the reality of it. We all want it back quickly, but some things have to take precedence, and the way I see it is that the people who want it avoided have this kind of fixation of, you can't mess up next season. The reality is, and I've made this point a number of times in recent weeks and months, they're already going to have to mess up seasons shortly because of this Qatar World Cup in 2022. So this idea that we've always had seasons between August and May, we have, but that was going to change anyway. So to some degrees, that should make people a little bit more relaxed about it, but it doesn't seem to be. Everybody seems to be forgetting about that. So the thought of not having any football till 2021 or being able to go to a stadium until 2021 doesn't fill me with any joy at all. But if that's what needs to happen, so that the season can be played out properly, and that football can continue and hopefully maybe improve, because we've all spoken for years and years about the various problems with the game and the modern game this and the modern game that. Well, there is an opportunity on our hands now and obviously we wouldn't have wanted it to come about this way, but to actually put different systems, different measures into place. We've all been, it's a common kind of theme of any kind of job, really. Just because we've always done it a certain way doesn't mean you always have to do it that way. Now, obviously, everyone's hand's being forced now because of this pandemic situation that we're in. But I think people just need to, let's say, relax about it, because it's an anxiety-making situation, and I'm as filled with anxiety as anybody about it. But I just feel that the whole concept of deadlines and putting a timescale on it is wrong. When there are people who are dying in hospital and relatives who aren't even able to go and visit them or pay their respects to them. And this push that a lot of people seem to be having to get football done as soon as possible is quite unseemly and almost obscene in many ways. We all want it back, of course we do, but people need to get their priorities right, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Well put there, Dan. Final word for you, Matt, on today's pod in terms of all of the issues, of course, we've gone through. This project restart, in fact, a whole project that seems to be built around dates. On Monday, it's meant to be 2 weeks until Premier League clubs return to training. Of course, we've got to wait and see what the government are going to say. Arsenal are one club who have already returned to training on an individual basis and social distancing. But the more and more you look at it, and the more and more we've spoken over the last half an hour, it really does seem to be a very ambitious project that just yet at the moment seems to somewhat be stalling.
Yeah, I think ambitious is the word, really. I think we've seen so many different countries take different approaches. We've discussed Germany, we've discussed France. They've done the complete opposite things. Even within the Premier League, you mentioned Arsenal, West Ham now are back in training. Liverpool are hoping to be back in training in a couple of weeks' time, but who knows whether that plan will get changed between now and then. It's just so difficult to predict because everyone seems to have a different idea of what's best. I think look, you're not going to get a consensus, but I think there's got to be some sort of rules or regulations really set down in stone to say you can't do this or you can do this, and this is the way we're going to go about it. But yeah, just in terms of rushing football back, I think it's pretty much guaranteed now that it will come back without fans. There's some suggestion that fans won't be allowed in stadia for the rest of this year. Maybe maybe January will be the next time that any of us can go and see a football match. And if that is the case, obviously that's not great. It's not ideal, but I think it is an opportunity for us to really appreciate fans again, because we've seen talk this week of sort of projections of fans being put into the stadiums and things like that, like a computer game, which is absolutely bizarre thing to even suggest and concoct. But it does sort of show the value that fans have, not just in the stadium, but for television audiences as well. And I think this is a big opportunity. Again, not in the way that we wanted it to come about, but it's a big opportunity for football fans to go, you know what, we're actually really important here, and we need to be recognised once fans are allowed back into stadiums. Things like kick-off times, things like ticket prices, anything like that, fans are going to have a much bigger say once they do come back into the stadiums, I think. And there's not many positives to come out of the situation, but maybe that can be one of them.
Yeah, let's hope that is one silver lining. But patience certainly seems to be the key. And good things do, of course, come to those who wait. And Liverpool will get their hands on the Premier League title one way or another. We're certain of that here on the Blood Red podcast, here from the Liverpool Echo. Do make sure that you keep across the Echo website for the latest on everything that is happening regarding the developments with the Premier League. I've been Guy Clarke, alongside me, Matt Addison and Dan Kay. Thank you to you guys for joining us, to you, the listeners, for joining us too. And if we can offer some relief, some light relief during this time, then we hope we certainly can do. Thank you to everyone for listening in. But until next time, it's bye for now.